Freunde der Sonne, ich finde, wir sollten jetzt die wichtigen Sachen im Leben klären und wir kommen wieder ein bisschen zurück zu den MMO-Monaten und wollen jetzt klären, lohnt sich 2026 noch Star Wars The Old Republic? Und das wird uns hoffentlich der Waydot erzählen, ein YouTuber mit 83.900 Abonnenten. Und dieses Video kam vor 3 Wochen raus und hat mittlerweile 181.378 Aufrufe. Ich habe keine Ahnung. Abwarten.
Star Wars The Old Republic is a free-to-play story-driven MMO where the decisions you make actually matter. Built around a light side versus dark side morality system that can even change your character's appearance over time. New Fable devs, take notes. Now, I first played this MMO back in 2023 where I documented my experience as a brand new player, and that video seemingly overnight became the biggest video on my entire channel with over 1.2 million views. But then I stopped playing. Not because Star Wars is a bad MMO, in fact I've consistently said it's one of my favorites, but because at the time I was covering a ton of other games and I never really found my way back. But now, it's 2026, and it's time. Today, I want to find out a few things. First, I nailed the new player experience in my last video, but I stopped around level 60. So this time, I'm pushing all the way to max level and stepping into the endgame to see what the long-term gameplay loop actually feels like. Second, I want to go over what's changed since I last played. Star Wars updates slowly compared to modern MMOs, but over a few years, it often feels like an entirely different game, with combat system changes and progression changes and seasonal content. All of it's changed. And finally, I want to dive into what I still think is Star Wars' biggest strength: alcoholism, the account-wide systems that make rolling new characters just as addicting as your first. In my original playthrough, I described Star Wars as an RPG first and an MMO second, and I still stand by that. But with the current state of modern MMOs, I feel like I need an escape again. I described Star Wars as an RPG first and an MMO.
Keanu Reeves! Da ist Keanu Reeves! Alter! Entschuldigung.
Second, and I still stand by that. But with the current state of modern MMOs, I feel like I need an escape again. I want to get lost in a world, in its story, and in its characters. So the real question, does Star Wars The Old Republic still deliver that in 2026? Before I jump back into the video, I want to quickly talk about today's sponsor, a game I've actually been messing around with lately called Neverness to Everness, or NTE for short. And honestly, this game is kind of wild. It's a supernatural, urban, open-world RPG, but imagine that whole anime aesthetic dropping into a mass. So, the last time I played Star Wars was November 28th, 2023. That's crazy. Here he is, my Sith Marauder, very much so a dark side character, as I chose mostly evil options. As you can see from the origin stories panel on the left side, I finished this character's origin story, and there's 8 different ones. Though many people will actually play through each of these stories even more than once, because each of them has different endings depending on your decisions in-game, and players can make a dark side or a light side version of each one. Anyway, I logged into the game, and you're immediately met with a pop-up detailing the next story missions you should work on. For me, that was the Shadow of Revan story. Now, Star Wars doesn't do these giant resets every few years, it builds one long evolving story with expansions. The Star Wars UI can be a little off-putting, especially if you're used to fantasy and medieval themes or settings like myself, but it's actually really simple to understand, and it's completely customizable. So I immediately reduced the scale and moved a couple of things around, and it cleared up a ton of real estate. Now, I have to admit, I hardly remember how to play my character at all, but I decided to just immediately jump back into the story quests, which is perfect because these older story quests like Shadow of Revan actually give massive experience rewards while completing them. So this would be the ideal way to start my leveling process. Now, I don't want to confuse people. The #1 reason that most people play Star Wars The Old Republic is the massive amount of immersive story. Your decisions actually impact what happens, and immediately I'm thrown right back into another fully voice-acted storyline with an insane number of cutscenes. But if you are the type of player who likes skipping the story and blasting through the content as fast as possible, you can do that too. Everything is completely skippable. But for some reason, in Star Wars, I actually enjoy the story. I'm not a story guy, but in this game in particular, I tend to not skip the story. That's not just because you can basically sleep with everyone you meet in this game.
aber, möchte ich mal eben sagen, bei Star Wars habe ich auch nicht das Phänomen, was wir bei Black Desert hatten, was wir bei Ark Knight hatten, auch wenn Ark Knight jetzt kein MMO ist, aber du, also sorry, aber gut, man kommt auch nicht wirklich großartig drum herum. Aber da holt einen die Story auch so ein bisschen ab. Und man kann mit jedem, den man trifft, halt Knickknack machen, ne? Knickknack. Knickknack, sagt er. Hey.
But the nonstop flirting is off the charts. So yeah, I play this one for the story, if you catch my drift. But yeah, for the next few hours, I was basically locked into the Shadow of Revan storyline, and honestly, this is where everything started clicking again. The more quests I did, the more I remembered how my class worked, getting back into the rhythm of my abilities, setting up combos, and managing cooldowns. It all started feeling natural again. And the game does a decent job of mixing things up. You're not just running from NPC to NPC turning in quests, you're constantly being pulled into cinematic dialogues and choices and full-on story missions that feel more like single-player RPG content than typical MMO questing. One of the coolest parts of the Shadow of Revan storyline is you have a bunch of these solo flashpoints.
Oh, das
These are basically
Solo
Star Wars
Flashpoints,
dungeon-style
cool.
missions,
Also
but they're designed
Flashpoints
so you
sind
can run them
Dungeons, die
completely on
Instanzen.
your own with a companion helping you out. I actually didn't realize that I had to resummon this companion after I died, so I died once and then about 3 more times before I finally realized he was missing, but that's besides the point. The XP rewards from these solo flashpoints were insane. Every time I finished one, my experience bar would jump up 1/4 of a level. So instead of just slowly grinding, it kind of felt like I did a story mission, and then I'd get a huge experience boost from a flashpoint, and then do another story mission, and then another flashpoint. It made leveling feel fast and satisfying and constantly rewarding. And throughout all of this, I was still making mostly evil decisions because I'm Sith. And anytime you lean into the dark side, you get dark side points, and you can actually watch your character slowly change their appearance visually more toward that alignment over time. It's not just a dialogue thing either. It will affect how NPCs react to you and how certain story moments play out, and even your character's overall vibe. And of course, lots and lots of flirting.
What are you doing later?
Cleaning up this mess, serving drinks, getting 2 seconds sleep, then serving some more. Sweet for asking, though.
Now, around level 65, I unlocked a class quest, and these are story missions that are completely unique to your specific class, meaning a Sith Marauder's quests are totally different from an agent or a Jedi. They usually dive deeper into your character's personal storyline, your role in the galaxy, and the choices you've been making along the way, but reward-wise, these can range from very important to not important at all. For example, this one here gave me a new chess piece, which wasn't even an upgrade, but later on, I did a class quest that opened up an entirely new skill line for me, and allowed me to play as an assassin instead of just a marauder. Basically allowing you to play multiple different combat styles on a character instead of being locked into one like you were before. Anyway, I wrapped up the Shadow of Revan content at around level 68, and I'll be honest, this is where I started feeling a little lost. I began bouncing between random story quests in my quest log, which is a totally valid way to play since it still progresses major storylines, it gives you experience, and unlocks important things for your character. But it quickly became clear that this was not the most efficient way to level anymore. Shadow of Revan had felt amazing because the story itself was basically your leveling engine. You got these huge XP rewards with constant progression, and that classic MMO pacing where you naturally hit higher levels just by playing through the storyline existed. But when I moved into Knights of the Fallen Empire, which is the next major storyline after Shadow of Revan, the difference was pretty stark. This expansion was released back in 2015, and it marked a big shift in Star Wars design philosophy. Instead of being built around fast MMO leveling, it was designed more like a cinematic, single-player RPG with chapter-based storytelling. And the experience gains were dramatically slower, because most of the content was made for characters that were already near max level. I guess at the time a lot of players loved the story, but criticized how much it moved away from the traditional MMO progression. And as a newer player coming in years later, I completely get why. Before, I was gaining levels every hour, or even faster, and now the same amount of playtime barely nudged my XP bar. So once I hit Knights of the Fallen Empire content and felt how slow the experience gains were, I'm not gonna lie, that's when I did what every MMO player eventually does, and just googled fastest XP per hour in Star Wars. Because the story was still cool, but there's no way I was crawling to max level at that pace.
You wouldn't stand a chance.
And pretty quickly, 2 things kept coming up over and over: heroic quests and veteran flashpoints. Now, heroics are basically more difficult daily style missions that reward big chunks of experience and gear, but flashpoints are where things really started to change. Veteran flashpoints are Star Wars dungeons. These are instance group content where 4 players fight through a bunch of enemies and bosses and complete objectives for experience and loot. And unlike story content, which you're taking slowly and enjoying, this is where most players are in full efficiency mode. It surprised me at first how fast people generally run these things. Your first time experience is probably going to be you joining a group, and by the time you're even oriented, people are going to be halfway finished the entire dungeon. It
Ja,
depends on which
klassische
dungeon you end up
MMO-Dingens,
queuing
ey.
into, but some flashpoints take way longer than others, and some have more cutscenes and stopping points, but most groups are just straight up speedrunning. There's one super popular one called Hammer Station that everyone basically farms because you can just rush through it insanely fast, to the point where veteran players have the whole thing memorized and they pull the entire dungeon.
Die habe ich auch
all the
schon
way
mal
to
gemacht,
last
glaube
boss.
ich.
It's really similar, if you've ever played Elder Scrolls Online, to their leveling dungeons, where it's basically just a race to the finish line. So at first it felt a little overwhelming. I'd load in and suddenly everyone is sprinting ahead while I'm still figuring out where the bosses are, but honestly, by my third or fourth run, it started clicking. Once you get a decent group, it almost becomes muscle memory. You pull enemies, you burn them down, you move on, and when everything lines up, you can clear these insanely fast. So this is where my leveling went from kinda slow and painful to pretty much flying. Every flashpoint completion was giving massive amounts of XP, and the levels were coming in fast. And on top of that, I was upgrading my gear constantly. Like every single run, I was replacing my chest or my gloves or my weapon, to the point that my character started looking kinda stupid. One piece would be sleek Sith armor, and another would look like it belonged to a bounty hunter, and then another like some random soldier. Just completely mismatched because I was upgrading so fast I didn't even care what anything looked like. But on top of experience and gear, flashpoints can also give you a bunch of upgrade currencies for endgame progression, and you can get cosmetic drops and credits, which is the currency in-game for repairs and other upgrades. So you're actually working towards some of your endgame progress while still leveling, which is honestly what made this gameplay loop feel so satisfying.
Das ist gut. Oh ja, wenn da so viele Nummern kommen, das ist doch sexy, ey.
But after running what felt like dozens, maybe even over 100 flashpoints, I finally hit level 80. And at this point, the game opens up even more. Up until now, everything's been about leveling efficiency, but once you reach max level, the focus shifts entirely to gearing and choosing just how deep you want to go into the endgame content. Now, flashpoints don't just stop being relevant at this point, they basically become your main progression path. You can keep running veteran flashpoints to increase your gear rating, replacing pieces little by little, and pushing towards the max gear score of 340. At this point, you can also start working on master flashpoints, and these are the harder, more mechanic-heavy versions that actually require good gear, proper rotations, and coordinated groups instead of just speedrunning through everything. On top of that, Star Wars also has full-scale operations, which are basically its own version of raids. These are the big group activities with multiple bosses, complex mechanics, and some of the best gear in the game as rewards. I didn't personally dive into raiding this time around. You need to find
Das, was ich halt an Star Wars echt noch sehr, sehr weird finde, was ja auch irgendwie, ja, dazu passt, also ich weiß nicht, ob es dazu passt, aber ich finde das krass, dass das Ziel von dir einfach hier unten neben deinem Dings ist. In jedem anderen MMO hast du es hier oben irgendwo. Da muss man sich richtig hart dran gewöhnen, finde ich.
a guild and people willing to take you, but just looking into them made it clear that for players who love traditional MMO endgame, there's absolutely a long-term grind here. Between flashpoints and master flashpoints and operations and PvP and seasonal content and gearing progression in general, you can very easily sink hundreds of hours into max level gameplay alone. But what's funny about hitting the endgame in Star Wars is that it didn't make me want to grind forever on this one character. It actually did the opposite. At this point, I felt like I understand how the systems worked, how gearing progressed, and how flashpoints fed into harder content, and I immediately wanted to start a new character. And this is where Star Wars really begins to shine. You see, one of the biggest reasons creating new characters feels so good in this game is because of how much progression is shared across your entire account. Tons of your unlocks will carry over, like mounts and fast travel perks and quality of life upgrades and cosmetics and legacy abilities, experience boosts. So instead of feeling like you're starting from scratch, each new character feels like it's building on everything you've already worked on. You move faster, you unlock things earlier, and you just have way more freedom. So rolling a new class isn't a full reset, and if you're a bit of an altaholic like myself, this is dangerous in regards to playtime. Because every class has its own fully voiced storyline with unique companions, different moral choices, and completely different perspectives on the galaxy. You can spend thousands of hours in Star Wars just playing through these stories. So after spending all that time mastering these systems on one character, the idea of going back and experiencing a brand new story, but with all my account-wide upgrades making it smoother, became insanely tempting. So I want you all to meet Emotional Guy. He's a smuggler who specializes in sniping your girl's heart. But no, I plan on playing this character, and no matter what options I have to pick the most moody, most emotional, most dramatic choice every time.
You stupid blaster. What about my ship?
I don't care if this decision leads me more to the light side or the dark side. I don't care if this decision results in romance or not. It's just that at every turn, I have to be the biggest drama queen.
What's a knockout like you doing in this dump?
And honestly, I've been playing this guy for like a couple of hours now, and it's just hilarious. I'm already having a blast. And what's awesome is you can basically create any personality for your character beforehand, and then no matter what, to force yourself to choose the option which
Das ist
mostly
auch geil,
aligns
ja. Daran habe ich gar nicht
Picked the wrong
gedacht.
side, and now you're paying for it.
It doesn't work for every interaction in the game, but it works for a surprising amount, and it makes for some genuinely hilarious moments.
Emotionally
But outside of just this narrative choice, as I basically played pretend while playing a pretend game, I found that the sniper was actually a really fun class to play. First of all, the range classes in Star Wars feel like nothing I've ever played before. I'm using grenades and taking cover. You don't have to aim, but for a tab target game, the range actually feels really unique. But yeah, this guy turns everything into an emotional roller coaster, and the fact that you can start a new character with this sort of playstyle in mind just goes to show how deep the storytelling and narrative and player choice really goes in Star Wars. This is all for me to say the true endgame in Star Wars is just starting over and playing as a new character. The alcoholism is my endgame. Completing all the origin stories is my raid log. You know, when I first played Star Wars back in 2023, I went in expecting another MMO that I'd tried for a week and move on from. And instead, the video ended up becoming the biggest thing on my channel. But more importantly, it reminded me of why I even fell in love with MMOs in the first place. The sense of discovery, the progression, the feeling of actually living in a world instead of just checking off systems. And then life and other games happened, and the MMO genre has begun exploding on itself, but somehow Star Wars is still here, just chilling. So coming back in 2026, I honestly didn't know what to expect. I figured maybe the magic wouldn't be there anymore, maybe it would feel dated, maybe it would feel like another MMO barely hanging on. Especially now that I've played so many other games in the genre, I thought it might feel a bit like all the others. But instead, I found a game that still knows exactly what it wants to be, and it's not a content treadmill designed to burn you out, it's not like a second job, it's just a really solid MMO. I got into the story again, I discovered the endgame loop, I speedran flashpoints, I geared up, and instead of feeling exhausted, which tends to be my normal reaction after reaching the endgame in most MMOs, instead, I immediately wanted to make another character. That's when it hit me. Star Wars isn't trying to just artificially increase your playtime through dailies and login rewards, it's genuinely just trying to entertain you. And in 2026, that feels weirdly rare. While half the MMO genre is out here collapsing, Star Wars is just like, hey man, you want to play a dungeon? You want to do some storyline? You want to make a new character and be evil today? There's no pressure at all. It never feels like you're playing wrong. So yeah, I came back to Star Wars to see what the endgame was like in 2026, and I'm staying because I needed a new character after I already got to the endgame, and it reminded me of what MMOs are supposed to feel like. I'm definitely not done with this game. There's still classes I haven't touched, stories I haven't seen, endgame content I haven't even scratched, and honestly, I'm excited about that again. Anyway, folks, I want to say a massive thanks to everyone who made it to the end of the video. Don't forget a like, a comment, a sub. Those things help a bunch, and if you really enjoyed the video, consider becoming a channel member. But I will catch you all in the next one.
Alter, das war ein sehr gutes Video.